Antonio Engels, the vanishing specter. In 1992, Spain was gripped by one of its darkest chapters. 3 young girls, Antonia Gomez, Miriam Garcia, and Desiree Hernandez, were brutally attacked, raped, and murdered while on their way to a high school party in the Alcácer region. The country reeled in horror as the case unfolded. 2 suspects emerged, Miguel Riquet Tarrega and the enigmatic Antonio Engels. Riquet was arrested and sentenced to an astonishing 170 years in prison. Yet, in 2013, due to complications with the European Court of Human Rights, Riquet walked free after serving just 16 years. Engels, on the other hand, became a ghost. He slipped through the cracks of reality, leaving behind only fragments and speculation. In 2021, Spanish courts reopened the case, seeking to shine a light on the shadows he left behind. Rumors swirled: did he flee to Brazil? Undergo extensive plastic surgery to become unrecognizable? No one could say for sure. But 1993 brought another twist. Aboard the City of Plymouth, a stowaway was reported, identified by the captain as Engels. When the ship docked in Dublin, the stowaway vanished, disappearing into the city's foggy street. Was it truly him? If so, his arrival eerily coincided with the disappearance of 27-year-old Annie McCarrick. Irish authorities have since speculated about his possible involvement in a series of other vanishings. Could justice still catch up with the elusive shadow of Antonio Engels? The Eastbound Strangler, 4 lives silenced. On November 20, 2006, an ordinary walk became a nightmare for 2 women in a suburb outside Atlantic City. Behind the Golden Key Motel, they stumbled upon a macabre sight: 4 women lying face down, fully clothed except for their shoes and socks, arranged in a hauntingly precise line. Their names were Barbara Brader, Molly Jean Diltz, Kim Raffo, and Tracy Ann Roberts. Each had been strangled, a gruesome signature that would earn their killer the name, the Eastbound Strangler. The killings were swift and brutal. The timeline added to the chilling mystery. Brader had been missing for nearly a month, while Raffo was last seen alive just the day before the grim discovery. The Toronto Sun reported that law enforcement faced no shortage of suspects at first. Yet, one by one, each lead fell apart. The cases grew cold, leaving a community desperate for answers. 15 years later, Chief of County Investigations Bruce Shields reignited hope with a renewed appeal for information. "We haven't stopped. We won't stop," he declared. The $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Somewhere out there, the Eastbound Strangler walks free, while the shadows of 4 women's untold stories cry out for justice. Hercules, justice or terror? In the early months of 2019, 3 men in Bangladesh were found dead, each bearing a grim declaration of their alleged crimes. Sujal, Ripon, and Rakib Molla had all been shot in the head, their bodies discarded with chilling precision. Around each neck hung a note, a public condemnation that left no doubt as to their fate. They had been accused of rape, and they were executed for it. The name signature? Hercules. Mahmoud Hassan was among the first to stumble upon one of these grisly scenes on January 26, 2019. He later recalled, "It felt strange and scary to see this happen in my area. But it also felt like justice." The message around Rakib Molla's neck was explicit: "I am Rakib who raped. This is the fate of the rapist. Rapists be aware." Hercules. Was Hercules a lone vigilante? A secretive network? The answers remain as elusive as the figure's true identity. The media's reaction was polarizing. While the Statesman labeled Hercules a serial killer, Al Jazeera painted him as a vigilante. The line between justice and terror blurred, leaving a nation to question the price of retribution. Law enforcement remained stumped, uncertain if they were chasing a single man or a shadowy group. The families of the slain men whispered of abductions by plainclothes officers, while authorities hinted at a backlash against rising rape cases. Hercules remains a mystery, haunting the streets and minds of Bangladesh. The Highway of Tears, a path of tragedy. Stretching 450 miles through the rugged wilderness of British Columbia, Canada's Yellowhead Highway 16 is both a lifeline and a corridor of despair. Since 1969, it has earned a chilling name, the Highway of Tears. It all began with the disappearance of Gloria Levine Moody, a 26-year-old woman. Over the decades, Indigenous women and girls have continued to vanish or turn up dead along this route. Officially, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police recognize 18 victims, but Indigenous communities know the number is far higher, some say as many as 80. The killer or killers have never been caught. For over 50 years, this haunting pattern of disappearances and deaths has plagued the remote communities of northern British Columbia. Hitchhiking, a risky practice born of necessity, has become a grim thread tying many of the cases together. People, especially Indigenous women, hitch rides along the highway to reach friends, family, or jobs in distant towns. In this isolated region with few transportation options, it is a dangerous gamble. Jessica McDermott's book, Highway of Tears, a true story of racism, indifference, and the pursuit of justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, paints a harrowing picture of systemic neglect and discrimination. The danger persists even today. Professor Jacqueline Holler's 2012 study confirmed that hitchhiking remains a necessity for many, particularly among the Indigenous population, due to economic and social barriers. The highway, remote and unyielding, becomes a stage where predators strike without warning. Efforts to stop the tragedy are ongoing. In 2005, Project Ipana was launched to investigate and hopefully solve these cases. Named after an Inuit spirit goddess who watches over the deceased, Ipana focuses on 18 cases, all involving women engaged in high-risk behavior and all last seen within a mile of Highway 16, Highway 97, or Highway 5. But even as hope lingers, the road stretches on, bearing witness to stories that still demand answers and justice. The I-70 Killer, a trail of fear across the Midwest. Spring, 1992. A stretch of I-70 became a road of fear, a highway stained with blood and unanswered questions. Between April 8th and May 7th, 6 lives were snuffed out across Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. Each victim met their end in small businesses just off the highway, a chilling pattern that pointed to a single, ruthless hand. 5 of the victims were women, their lives taken with a .22 caliber bullet. The 6th, a man with a long ponytail, was believed to have been mistaken for a woman. No robbery, no sexual assault, just cold precision. Witnesses offered fragments of a man, a fleeting figure with reddish or light brown hair, around 5'7", lean at 140 to 160 pounds, a ghost with a face no one could quite recall, who left death in his wake. In late 2021, a glimmer of hope emerged when law enforcement released an updated sketch of the killer, aged to show what he might look like 3 decades on. But there was more, a possible key to unraveling the mystery. The killer's weapon of choice was described as a historic remake of an old German Navy pistol, with a long barrel and a wooden forearm. Detective Tim Relf of Wichita expressed hope that this detail could jog someone's memory. Yet, for 30 years, the I-70 killer has remained a specter, haunting the hearts of those left behind. He may still walk among us, a face hidden in plain sight, waiting for his secrets to be exposed. Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel Phantom. London, 1888. A thick fog clings to the cobbled streets of Whitechapel, shrouding the horrors that will soon unfold. A killer stalks the night, a predator who would come to be known as Jack the Ripper. He targeted society's most vulnerable, brutally murdering at least 5 women: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Each life was ended with a savagery that sent shockwaves through Victorian England. Jack the Ripper didn't just kill. He mutilated with a precision that spoke of chilling skill. Contemporary reports described the gruesome nature of his attacks: bodies disemboweled, organs removed as if by a surgeon's hand. Was he a doctor? A butcher? Or something darker, lurking in London's underbelly? Theories abounded, and so did fear. The press fueled a firestorm of panic, and the Ripper's taunting letters, including the infamous "Dear Boss" letter, etched his legend deeper into the city's psyche. Suspects came and went. Doctors, princes, beggars, and barbers all fell under suspicion. But the Ripper remained an enigma. The police, desperate to catch him, employed methods that would lay the groundwork for modern criminal profiling and public appeals. Over a century later, Jack the Ripper's identity remains a chilling mystery. He has become a symbol of human darkness, a phantom who lives on in books, films, and nightmares. His shadow lingers over London, a stark reminder of terror that never fully fades. The Juarez Ripper shadows in the desert. For decades, Juarez, Mexico, has been a city haunted by a question with no answer: who is killing the women of Juarez? The bodies began appearing in the mid-1990s, discarded in the desert like a macabre signature. The Seattle Times reported that authorities believe a serial killer could be prowling Juarez's streets, or perhaps the staggering number of deaths is tied to gang activity. Whatever the cause, one thing is certain: these women were hunted because they were women. Hundreds of victims, countless lives ended. The signs of trauma and abuse on many of the bodies spoke of suffering beyond word. And the horror did not relent. In 2019 alone, over 1,000 women were added to the grim tally, and those were just the cases known to law enforcement. The killings fell under a dark umbrella: femicide. Then, in 2020, a familiar story once again gripped headlines with new urgency. Isabel Cabanillas de la Torre, a beloved artist and activist, was murdered. Her death ignited protests, as scores of women marched through the streets demanding justice, not only for Isabel but for every woman stolen by violence. Still, the killers roam free, their names unknown, while Juarez bears the weight of unhealed wounds. Little Rock's serial stabber: a city in fear. Little Rock, Arkansas, found itself gripped by a peculiar and chilling terror: a serial stabber with no discernible pattern. Unlike many killers who follow a type, this one appeared to strike randomly, a nightmare for any community. On April 29, 2021, Police Chief Keith Humphrey made a grim announcement: Little Rock was facing an unknown predator. By then, there had been 4 attacks, 3 of them fatal, all in the dead of night. The spree began in August 2020 when 64-year-old Larry McChristian was killed. A month later, 62-year-old Jeff Welch became the second victim. After a lull, the killer resurfaced on April 11, 2021, attacking a 43-year-old woman and stabbing her 15 times. Miraculously, she survived. But the following day, the horror continued with the fatal stabbing of 40-year-old Marlon Franklin. The police issued an urgent appeal for witnesses and surveillance footage. They shared grainy, almost spectral images of the suspect on their YouTube channel, but the figure offered no clues, just a faceless specter haunting the night. A $20,000 reward remains on the table, but the serial stabber is still out there, a shadow among the city lights. I will post a link to the video released by Little Rock Police Department in the video description. Pedro Lopez, the Monster of the Andes. Some stories are so horrifying that they sound like twisted fiction, but the nightmare of Pedro Lopez is all too real. Known as the Monster of the Andes, Lopez's crimes stretch across the landscapes of Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. His life was a storm of violence. Cast out as a child after assaulting his sister, Lopez grew up on Colombia's streets, hardened and vengeful. Lopez drifted across South America, raping and killing wherever he went. Nearly executed for his crimes in 1978, he was spared by the intervention of a missionary, a decision that allowed him to continue his reign of terror. Lopez confessed to killing up to 3 people a week, and by 1980, he was credited with at least 110 murders in Ecuador alone. Shockingly, his capture led to a mere 14-year prison sentence, reduced for good behavior. Released to Colombia, he was confined briefly in a psychiatric facility before being declared sane in 1998, freed on a $50 bond, and vanishing into thin air. The true scale of his atrocities remains unknown, but it is believed he may have claimed over 300 lives. The Monster of the Andes is still out there, his shadow casting terror over a continent that has not forgotten. The Chicago Strangler shadows in the Windy City. In 2019, whispers became headlines when the Chicago Tribune reported on a chilling theory: a serial killer lurking in Chicago's underbelly, preying on vulnerable women. For years, the city had turned a blind eye to patterns that seemed all too obvious. Between 2001 and 2017, at least 75 women had been strangled or suffocated, their lives cut short in a grim, unending pattern. Most were black women, their stories lost in the noise of a bustling metropolis. By 2018, 4 more women had met the same fate. Chicago police hesitated to acknowledge a killer in their midst but eventually admitted it was a possibility. The city was divided, some saw the connections clearly, while others refused to speak of patterns that exposed a dark, systemic rot. In late 2021, a documentary titled The Hunt for the Chicago Strangler debuted, casting a harsh light on the case and igniting new demands for answers. Director Jennifer Anderson reminded the world that these women weren't just names on a list, they were mothers, daughters, sisters, each robbed of a future. Justice remains elusive, but hope still flickers for the victims left behind. The Danilovsky Maniac, Russia's hidden terror. Deep in Russian territory lies a mystery as chilling as the bitter winds of Cherepovets. Between 2004 and 2007, the Danilovsky Maniac claimed a series of victims, leaving behind a trail of brutality. Stabbings, mutilations, and even organ removal became his grotesque signature. The name Danilovsky came from the street where one victim was discovered, but this killer did not remain a mere ghost in shadows. Law enforcement possesses a detailed description: heavy-set, patchy hair, gray eyes, a face that could vanish in a crowd. Even more damning, DNA evidence was recovered from beneath victims' fingernails. Yet, without a match, the man remains unaccounted for, a specter with a name and no face. Witnesses claim to have seen him marking his territory with explicit graffiti near crime scenes, a taunt to those who hunted him. The Danilovsky Maniac remains free, a testament to the labyrinthine challenge of unmasking evil in vast, cold landscapes. The Jeff Davis 8, a Bayou Mystery. In May 2005, the sleepy air of Louisiana's Jefferson Davis Parish was shattered by horror. 8 women, ranging from 17 to 30, were found dead over the span of 4 years. Their stories were as different as their ages and appearances, but they shared connections, each knew one another, and most were entangled in a web of sex work and the region's drug trade. As bodies continued to surface, private investigator Ethan Brown unraveled threads that hinted at something far darker than incompetence, possible misconduct and cover-ups by local law enforcement. At one crime scene, investigators mingled casually, treating it more like a grotesque exhibit than a sacred quest for justice. Brown's efforts exposed a festering underbelly, but the case remains open. The Jeff Davis 8 are more than victims. They are symbols of a broken system and lives left unavenged in the deep bayou's shadows. The Killing Fields, a Texas mystery. In 1983, the small Texas town of League City was forever marked by a sinister discovery. Heidi Villarreal Fay vanished, her last known steps leading into oblivion. Months later, her remains were found in a desolate patch of land, a place that would soon become known as the Killing Fields. The sun-scorched ground seemed to hold secrets beneath every blade of grass, secrets that would haunt families for decades. 2 years later, tragedy struck again. The remains of 16-year-old Laura Miller were discovered mere yards from where Fay had been found. While searching for answers, investigators stumbled upon a third body, known only as Jane Doe until 2019, when she was finally identified as Audrey Lee Cook. The field yielded one more victim, found in 1991 and long known as Janet Doe, until her true identity, Donna Gonsalon Prudhomme, was unveiled in 2019. Despite extensive investigations, no definitive connections between the victims have been established. Witnesses? None have come forward. The field remains a taunting specter of unanswered questions, even as the FBI continues to seek the faintest whisper of a lead. Anything anyone knows, no matter how small it seems, urged Special Agent Richard Renison. For the families of the women, justice lingers like a distant mirage, tantalizing but heartbreakingly out of reach. The Manchester Pusher Myths or Murders. Picture this: Manchester's canals, winding like veins through the city's heart. To some, they're romantic. To others, they hide dark secret. Between 2007 and 2015, 85 bodies were fished from these waterways, sparking fear that a predator, dubbed the Manchester Pusher, was prowling the street. Authorities insisted there was no serial killer. Most deaths, they claimed, were accidental or suicide. But for grieving families, doubt and suspicion festered. Could so many similar deaths really be mere coincidence? Professor Craig Jackson from Birmingham University thought not. His questions birthed a chilling hypothesis that captured public imagination and spiraled into a documentary. The idea of a killer silently lurking in Manchester's shadows, preying on the unsuspecting, refuses to fade. Local filmmaker Anthony Mulligan, alias Daft Monkey, added fuel to the fire, releasing a documentary dissecting the pusher theory. With over 80 bodies recovered since 2008, the unsettling possibility remains. Law enforcement may dismiss it as myth, but for many, the fear is all too real. The Rainbow Maniac, a Brazilian city's dark chapter. The Brazilian city of São Paulo, 2008, vibrant and electric, had just celebrated one of the world's largest gay pride events. But in the months that followed, joy turned to dread. 13 men were murdered, each a target of a killer who became known as the Rainbow Maniac. His victims, gay men, were shot execution-style in Peturi's Park, a grotesque irony amidst a city that had so recently celebrated love and acceptance. Witnesses claimed a retired police officer, Jairo Francisco Franco, had been seen committing one of the murders. It seemed like a breakthrough, but in a cruel twist, Franco was acquitted. The Rainbow Maniac vanished once more into obscurity, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak and outrage. Meanwhile, violence against Brazil's LGBTQ+ community continues to rise, a painful reminder of wounds that remain unhealed. The Station Strangler, Cape Town's unsolved horror. It began in 1986 on the wind-swept Cape Flats of South Africa. A faceless predator stalked the innocent, becoming known to the world as the Station Strangler. By 1994, the bodies of 22 young boys had been discovered, each one horrifically abused and then strangled. A grim pattern emerged. The Strangler preyed on vulnerable children, leading them to their tragic fate. In 1995, the arrest of Norman Simons, a schoolteacher, offered a momentary glimpse of justice. He was convicted for the murder of 10-year-old Elroy Van Rooyen, the final known victim. The public found a face to pin their fear upon, and Simons became the Station's Strangler in their eyes. Yet, cracks began to show. Simons was never charged with any of the other killings, and in 2010, the cold case was reopened. DNA from crime scenes was retested. The result? No match to Simons. Doubts began to fester. Did they have the wrong man? If so, the real killer still walks free. Who is the true Station Strangler? Decades later, the unsolved mystery continues to haunt Cape Town, an ever-present reminder that justice may still be just out of reach. The West Mesa Murders, Buried Secrets of Albuquerque. Central Avenue in Albuquerque is a high-crime stretch, but no one could have imagined the darkness that simmered just beneath the surface. It began around 2001, when women began disappearing at an alarming rate. Most were forgotten by a society quick to turn away from uncomfortable truths. Then, on February 2, 2009, everything changed. A woman walking her dog stumbled across a human bone. What followed was the unearthing of a mass grave in the desert, a crime scene so vast, it stunned the entire nation. 11 women and 1 unborn child were found buried together, victims of a nameless monster dubbed the West Mesa Bone Collector. The victims had varied lives. Many were connected to the drug and sex trades, but not all. Selania Edwards was just 15, barely more than a child herself. Michelle Valdez, 22, was pregnant when her life was stolen and her body left to the sand. For these women, justice has remained elusive. Hundreds of interviews, countless suspects, yet the killer's identity remains a ghostly specter, haunting the dry New Mexico landscape. A $100,000 reward still stands for anyone who can bring the bone collector to light. Investigator Ida Lopez continues the search, hoping one day to find answers in the shifting sands of time.
Like and subscribe.